again, sizing up Murphy. Drives, floats, hangs, and scores on the turnaround. J-Dub way behind the three-point line and hits way behind the three-point line. Got blocked. What a rejection by Holmgren. Standing tall like a wall.
This is New York. You're listening to the Uncontested.
What is up, Thunder fans, and welcome to the Uncontested podcast. I am your host for tonight, Taylor Peterson, and I am joined by one fella that I was actually at the Thunder game with last night. We got to experience another Shea 50 piece, Jacob Niffen.
What's up?
Jacob and I had to jump on tonight, give you guys a little bonus content because it was an insane NBA trade deadline. Even if the deadline today itself wasn't quite as crazy as the rest of the deadline as a whole, definitely one of the craziest I can remember in recent history, if not of all time. So we wanted to jump in, give you all a little extra content, talk about what the Thunder did and did not do, as well as some rest of the league, overall thoughts and trades that happened and how that may impact the Thunder. But before we get any further, we are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and proudly brought to you all by Prairie Artisan Ales. Great sponsor. Having a ton of fun with them. Again, appreciate all of your guys' support and reaching out to us, letting us know you're buying beers at the grocery store or you're going to Prairie's tap room to watch games. All that's been awesome. So we really appreciate the support. Also, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you will see a fancy QR code that our guy Justin made. That will give you a link to our Patreon, which gives you access to our Discord, which is probably the biggest perk that you hear us talk about before every single podcast. It's been a ton of fun, especially during the trade deadline. Over the past week, we've had an absolute blast going through and just talking about the different trades, going back and forth during live Thunder games. And we have a lot of bonus content as well. Speaking of which, this upcoming Saturday, Thunder have a big game against the Memphis Grizzlies, who are now, after the Rockets have lost 5 straight, they're now the second place in the West. So that'll be a really fun one. We're going to, in our Discord, have that streamed. All of us will be in a group chat, a group voice chat, and we have a ton of fun with this. Be sure to join for that, bonus podcast episodes, etc. I think that's all the housekeeping. Jacob, an insane NBA trade deadline. Just kind of some overall thoughts, I think, before we get into what the Thunder did and didn't do, and then some winners and losers from the trade deadline. In my opinion, I think this was probably one of the craziest and at least most surprising trade deadlines that I can remember. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, lots of big names traded. It had the most surprising, I think probably the most surprising NBA trade of all time, which really just blew everything up. But you had lots of rumors going around, lots of things here and there, and then just some pretty substantial players getting traded between Anthony Davis, Luka Doncic, Jimmy Butler, De'Aaron Fox. Like a lot of good players got moved. I don't know how many total players got moved today. I haven't seen that statistic, but the deadline day today wasn't super busy as it has been in the past. I always go back to the Woj good God tweet. Like that was the craziest deadline moment ever. Just because of how many things came across the board at the end. But cumulatively over the past week, I would say that this week of NBA trades is probably one of the most significant ever. And that's boosted because it has the most surprising NBA trade of all time.
I agree completely. Definitely boosted because of that. And also, like you mentioned, a lot of the times, like there's all these rumors about the big names that are going to be traded leading up to the deadline. We usually only see like maybe 1, maybe 2 all-stars or superstars that are traded. But this is the first deadline in a long time that I can remember, in comparison to the offseason, where it's much more likely for a bunch of stars to be traded and moved around the league, where these trades actually happen mid-season. And so that was crazy to me as well, obviously led by the Luka trade.
Speaking of that, you say that, but did a total of 1 all-stars on this all-star season get traded? Is that right?
This season. That's a good point.
Yeah, this season all-stars. 1, Anthony Davis.
Anthony, yeah. Because Luka was injured. He wasn't named. BI,
De'Aaron
obviously,
Fox,
and
BI,
Jimmy.
Jimmy. Yeah.
De'Aaron Fox. That is,
So I think one All-Star got traded.
that's crazy. But I mean, cumulative to use
Yeah,
your word.
I know.
They've been named all-stars in the past, but no, you're exactly right. Obviously, we don't want to spend too much time just on overall thoughts, but just kind of rapid fire through these. I want your thoughts, Jacob. There was so much talk about this new CBA going to affect this offseason and the apron restrictions, the first apron and the second apron. We don't need to go into the specifics of those aprons, but because of that, there's all this talk about how hard it's going to be to pull off these bigger trades for these bigger names and bigger contracts. Well, one thing we did see was a lot of different teams making trades to get under the tax. You had the Atlanta Hawks do that today. You had the Cleveland Cavaliers make a huge trade. We'll get into them, but they still found a way to get under the tax. There was a handful of others that made specific moves to get under that tax threshold, like the Bucks, that allowed them to be able to, be able to use multiple contracts and trades when they were otherwise restricted. And yet there were still some huge names and contracts that were still traded. And there was all this talk from all the national NBA heads and all the analysts who understand the cap, talking about how we wouldn't really see these trades anymore with these new restrictions in place. And yet we just had one of the craziest NBA trade deadlines ever. Those were kind of my big takeaways, I think, from this deadline. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think when you pay people millions of dollars to understand the CBA, they'll figure out ways to make things work. And that's
100%. And when star players, whether they're former all-stars or bona fide superstars, when they went out, they usually still get their way, even with the new restrictions.
There was also just some trades where, whether it being tax ducking or apron ducking or whatever, some trades that were just weird, dumb.
Yes. The Clippers trading for Bogdanovich.
Or Memphis paying a first to get off Marcus Smart.
After
things
trading
like that.
2 firsts to get him. Also, Marjon Beauchamp being traded for Kevin Porter Jr. of all people.
Maybe a really unpopular opinion, Taylor, but I'm just going to say it because I don't really care, and it's my opinion. So 2 things kind of internally for me this trade deadline. One, I legitimately do feel bad for Mavericks fans. 2, whenever Sam Presti leaves the Thunder, that might be my exit from the Thunder as well. I don't want the well-being of my mental state to be tied to what some GM does with my basketball team. And like if I'm a diehard Mavs fan and it's like a big part of my life, and I get a 11 p.m. tweet from Sham saying that they just traded Luka Doncic, like that's like literally debilitating.
Yep.
Like imagine that tweet, but it's the Thunder have traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Jaren Jackson Jr. You know, like I would be in shambles, and I don't want to be in shambles. And Sam Presti won't do that, but when he's gone, there's no telling what happens after that. So
you're right. I think that's one more great overall theme and also a great transition into Thunder talk, because I actually tweeted something out half jokingly and half serious after Sam Presti and one of the trades that we'll get into essentially took advantage of another team needing to get under that tax, like we mentioned here at the top of the podcast, the Pelicans, in order to get additional draft assets and set his team up even better for the long-term future. And I just tweeted this out like, man, like Sam did it again. It's amazing, but he's got to get bored with this at some point. Like at what point, 3, 4, 5 years from now, he gets his championship, does he decide, you know what, I'm kind of bored fleecing all these GMs. Maybe it's time to go run a Fortune 500 company. Now, my counterpoint to what you said is that Sam Presti, not only will he have this team set up, this franchise set up for long-term success, but he'll have a great successor. I have no doubt about that. And the Thunder will be left in good hands whenever that happens. Hopefully.
Have you ever met Troy Weaver?
That's fair. That's fair.
That's all I got to say about that.
But that's a good transition into what the Thunder did and did not do, Jacob. We'll spend a lot of our time here before we get into some league-wide trades and takeaways and how that also may impact the Thunder. But overall, I feel pretty proud of us. I think we kind of predicted what Sam was thinking heading into this trade deadline. Essentially came down. Yeah, right, and that's the thing.
He told us after the Gordon Hayward trade, he said, "I realized maybe making fairly significant in-season moves kills chemistry and doesn't give guys time to gel, and you don't really know what you're getting." I think that quote for me, whenever he said that, really told me like they're not going to make moves at the deadline. Now maybe summertime looks different. Summertime will have to look different. There will be moving parts for this team in the offseason, but you're 40-9. Why would you make a trade?
Correct. And overreact to some of the things that are going on around the league. But the other thing that we predicted that he would do, and he did, although not quite to the extent I thought he may, but he consolidated his assets and continued to either kick the can down the road or just made it more strategic. I keep using that word, but better for the Thunder long term. And so obviously the first of those trades, and we won't really break this one down, but the Thunder traded their 2029 Phoenix second rounder for a Denver 2030 second rounder from the Charlotte Hornets. And basically the point of that, Thunder had like 5, maybe 6 second rounders in 2029, only 4 in 2020. So that just spreads it out and balances it so much better for the Thunder long term, which again is just such a Sam Presti trade. Crazy.
Yep. And then the same thing with the Tice trade, just eating a salary to pick up another asset. At some point, they're going to trade like 10 second rounders for a lottery pick or something.
Exactly. And so, so many people were saying, why don't we just sign AJ now to a contract? Or why don't we just sign Brandon Carlson while AJ's hurt after his second 10-day was up? Well, this was why, because Sam Presti was waiting for the trade deadline. So I'll just read all these subsequent moves back to back to back, because I think we can really just talk about them as a whole. But like you mentioned, the Thunder used their open roster spot after Brandon Carlson's second 10-way contract led to that open roster spot to absorb Daniel Tice, good old Danny T. We barely knew him, Jacob, for a 2031 least favorable second rounder between the Pels and Orlando. 15 minutes, literally, I looked at my clock. It was 2:15. 15 minutes after the deadline today, they waived Tice. And then like maybe an hour or so later, they immediately do what everybody's been saying. They sign AJ to a 2-year contract, $6 million. And here's a little speculation. Shout out to a friend of the podcast, Keith Smith, who's been on the podcast before. He mentioned that he assumes, I think we all do, that second year will be a team option for AJ. And the reason that would be is because the Thunder used the mid-level exception, I believe, which if you use the full mid-level exception, you can only sign players up to 3 years. Thunder signed AJ to a 2-year deal with that exception. But with that team option, they can decline the team option this offseason, then sign AJ to a full 4-year contract. That will be both more team-friendly for AJ, but doing how they did it today gives him a little more money up front, basically. And so it's a win-win, I think, for both sides. And that's really great. Obviously shows how much they view AJ. But then shortly after, Jacob, something else a lot of people have predicted is with that open 2-way spot, with AJ being converted, they signed Brandon Carlson back to a 2-way contract for the rest of the regular season. So again, just very smart moves from Sam. He didn't swing for the fences. And now we have AJ signed, presumably for the long term. And we have Carlson to use here while Chet's kind of getting back into form. We'll get into Chet here in a second.
Well, here's the thing, Taylor. The AJ Mitchell thing, like, cool, good for AJ. The Brandon Carlson thing, awesome. The Tice trade, who cares? The swapping the seconds, who cares? We're 14 minutes in. Let's talk about Chet Holmgren.
Yeah. So the big news today came from Shams, which was amazing. I was getting ready for work, on my way to work, and there's a Shams tweet that Chet Holmgren is off the injury report for Friday against the Toronto Raptors, which is tomorrow. For those of you listening, tomorrow will obviously be Friday. Pretty awesome, and very unlike the Thunder to announce this in this way. It was very obvious to me, Jacob, that they leaked this to Shams intentionally and wanted him to announce it, and for it to be kind of like a trade deadline thing. They wanted the rivals around the league to know that Chet's coming back and he's healthy. And kind of I think a little heads up to the Thunder fans, like, hey, we aren't making a trade deadline move because we don't have to. Chet's back.
Absolutely. back earlier than we expected, which is super exciting. He dropped a YouTube video, which was really cool. Lots of social media posts by Chet and the guys. Handful of thoughts, Taylor. First, excuse me.
Jacob's got the Lou flu.
Also known as COVID-19.
Straight out of Wuhan.
But it's 2025, so maybe it's
Wuhan.
maybe it's COVID-25. I don't know. Anyways, I forgot where I was going.
You had a lot of thoughts about Chet.
Minutes restriction for Chet. I don't think so. I feel like this team, and you could do some research and probably prove me wrong. I feel like this team routinely, like, they don't, if you have to come back to a minutes restriction or you have to come back to like sitting back to backs and stuff, I think the Thunder interpret that as you're not ready to come back. When you come back, you're ready to play.
Yep.
And so I've heard some people say, like, maybe Chet only plays like 20 minutes against the Raptors, and maybe he sits the second game of the back-to-back against the Memphis Grizzlies. I think if he's back, he's back. That's honestly what I believe. Like, if you told me he's going to play 30 minutes against the Raptors and then the next night he's going to play 30 minutes against the Grizzlies, that would not surprise me at all. It's going to be interesting to see how he moves, but as far as like timidness, on like being worried about that hip, I don't foresee that. He's going for the throat the first play of the game. I absolutely believe that. And I fully think in 24 hours from now, there will be an uncontested postgame podcast where we're talking about the starting lineup of the two bigs. I fully believe Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein will start. Nick can't be on the podcast tonight, but he did text and wanted, I don't know if he wanted me to say this, but he said I could say this. Nick said, quote, "I think it's been long enough that folks have forgotten how good Chet is. OKC has 2 All-Stars, and Chet is still the second best player on the team. He has Giannis-level upside on both ends. If he was on like 6 other franchises, he would be the clear-cut alpha number 1 they would build around." And I just completely agree with that from Nick. I wanted to read some stats here really fast.
I'm glad you got them, because I was about to pull them up. So I'm glad you do.
Yeah, I had tweeted them earlier today. My tweet said, OKC gets back a 7-1 big man who averaged 16 points on 50, 38, 78 splits, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 blocks a game, and had a defensive efficiency or defensive rating of 96.8 and an offensive rating of 112.9. That's a net of 16.2. I mean, I think go do yourself the favor before the Toronto game. Pull up the highlights of the Thunder season opener against the Denver Nuggets and just look what Chet did. I mean, he made the Joker look like a fool. He made the Joker look like a joker. I mean, it's
nobody does that in the league.
I think I agree with Nick. I think it's been long enough that we've kind of forgot what the guy is and what he can do. And maybe it will take a handful of games for him to kind of get back in the flow. But I don't think people realize, like, this is the biggest acquisition at the trade deadline for anybody. Considering what you had to give up, which was nothing, this is bigger than the Lakers getting Luka, because they had to give up a first rounder and Anthony Davis. Thunder gave up nothing and are getting back a guy who should have been an all-star, would probably be top 10 MVP talk, was going to be all NBA level guy and a defensive player of the year candidate this season. That guy's about to come back and play another 30 games for this team.
Agreed. Agree completely. I'm trying to pull this up. There was a quote from his video that he had that I absolutely loved, and it kind of goes to what you were saying there at the end. He said, this ain't a what if league. It's a nobody gives an F about that S. It's all about how you play your hand, not the cards you were dealt. That's why, this is the part I love. That's why even when I get a shitty break, I will bust your ass. Oh, I got chills. That's so good. But
we talked about this team having dogs. He's
The
the leader
leader.
of the pack.
I agree. I agree completely. But one thing that you brought up that I think is really important, and you mentioned like, we could pull up stats, maybe it would disprove it. But I think one thing that's absolutely for certain is, at least with this iteration of the Thunder, Mark has made it very clear with his interviews and his availability with the media that they don't just bring players back unless they're 100% ready to go. And so I think you're spot on. We aren't going to see a minutes restrictions for Chet. And I don't necessarily think they would bring him back on the first night of a Sega Baba
If they
and
weren't
then
going to play him.
not play him in the second game. That makes
Mhm.
zero sense. And the first game obviously is at home. They'll fly to Memphis for the away game on the Sega Baba on Saturday. I think we see him in both games, and I agree completely. Now, does that mean that Chet's just going to immediately be in the prime form that we saw him in at the beginning of the season before he went down with that hip injury? Not necessarily. Like with that hip injury, it's one thing to be back in shape and 100% and be cleared for full contact and be able to play in games again. It's another thing, to be in NBA game shape and get your legs back under you in a full 48-minute NBA game. And it's another thing too with that hip injury. Chet's so good. This is going to sound really funny, but hip mobility and using his hips and the way he defends on the perimeter and on the block and his rim protection. And so it may take a little time to get back to that form, which I wonder if that's why they're bringing him back a little early before the All-Star break. And you have a thought on that?
Yes. I've been thinking about the whole hip thing and swinging his hips. Like,
hips don't lie.
The hips
Jacob,
don't lie.
let me see those hips swing.
His ability to like move his hips, especially in the paint, to like block shots, to cut off drives. There would be a difference if it was the joint versus it was just like the middle of the big old hip bone that got cracked. If it's the joint, I'd be worried about the switching, moving the hips back and forth. Since it was a crack on the bone and nothing with the joint itself, I don't know how much mobility will be affected because it wasn't the joint. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's a great point.
Listen to me. All I have is a bachelor's degree, and it's in education. Okay, I'm not a medical guy at all, but that's what I would think.
I agree. I think that's a really good point. It's very different from him having some sort of joint injury. If that bone is fully healed, like, you still should have that flexibility, and it's going to be really fascinating to see him, like you said, hopefully in the back-to-back Friday and Saturday. And I can't wait. I also agree with you on lineups. I think we see Chet and Ihart start together, which is crazy. At the beginning of the season, we were saying Caruso may be starting next to Chet, and Ihart comes off the bench. But even more so than the starting lineup, I think I'm more excited about seeing how they stagger Chet and Ihart and how that helps the second unit that you and I saw in person last night really struggle with Shea when he was on the bench.
I think you would see Shea and Hartenstein and then Dub and Chet. I think Shea benefits more from the Hartenstein screens. I think Dub and Chet have a connection and are really good at that two-man game. I would assume that's kind of the staggering they do. But before we move on from Chet, real quick, they play a Toronto team tomorrow night that is profusely injured. No Jakob Poeltl, no RJ Barrett. I don't think Brandon Ingram would play tomorrow. I don't think. Scotty will be there. Give me your Chet stat line prediction for his first game back.
13 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 blocks.
That's pretty good. And how many minutes?
Oh gosh, that's tough. 26.
I like it.
What do you think?
Give me, I'm going to go ambitious. Give me 17, 8, 3 blocks. Yeah, 17, 8, 3, and 3.
Ooh.
And
he's averaging 16.8, I believe, on the season before he went down with the hip injury.
Give me 27 minutes.
I like it. I like it a lot. Just things I know we need to move on and talk a little more about league-wide stuff, but the things I'm really looking forward to, other than the stat line, it's just how different and maybe better his offense looks when he's playing alongside another big and he doesn't have to just be down low the entire time. Does that open up his offensive game more? Obviously, how does that open up the offensive game of his teammates with him spacing the floor, like J.W. and Shea specifically? And then also, is he just a madman going for blocks when he doesn't have to be the sole defensive anchor and you have iHeart protecting the rim? Like, is he just playing the free safety role and blocking everything? I'm really excited to see how that looks and flashes tomorrow and on Saturday.
Alex has a fun prediction here. He says, I predict Chet gets the first points of the game.
Ooh.
Man, it's gonna be a Friday night game. The arena's gonna be kind of ready to go. Chet gets announced in the starting lineups. There's gonna be a huge roar. And then if the first play of the game is like a Chet dunk or a Chet 3, that place will go ballistic.
Paycom will go. Loud City will go insane. Blow the top off the roof. We aren't sponsored by a sportsbook anymore, but Alex, I would be fascinated to see what that line looked like for Chet first bucket of the game. Interesting. Well, Jacob, like we said, the Thunder did what a lot of us expected to. They didn't consolidate first-round picks, but there's a lot of time to do that. In the offseason, we'll probably see more of that. Chet's back. That's the big takeaway here. But there were some insane trades around the league. So we're going to take our first and only break of the night here. And on the other side, let's get to some winners and losers of the traded line this season. We are back. Jacob, where do you want to start? Winners or losers?
Why don't you just name one and we'll say winner or loser?
Let's go with the low-hanging fruit here. And
let's rapid fire them.
Los Angeles Lakers.
Oh, we're going teams. We're not going trades.
There's multiple trades with a lot of these teams.
So Lakers, Luka trade, absolute winner. Mark Williams trade, I'm going loser. That's giving up a lot of assets for Mark Williams that I don't think is worth it.
I would go winner, obviously. Getting Luka for AD, who's aging on that contract, and now they have their star of the future. The biggest thing, obviously, we've talked about that ad nauseum, as has everybody around the league. Just not having to give up as much as more than they did to get Luka is huge. But the biggest thing to me, and I agree with you, Jacob, Mark Williams is an injury-prone player, right? He's still unproven. He's still young, and he's not a great defender. That being said, I think the Lakers went into these talks with the Mavericks thinking they were going to have to give all this up just to get Luka. And instead, they basically gave up both of those first-round picks plus Dalton Connect, and were able to get not only Luka, but Mark Williams. And when you think about it in that way, I think it's an absolute home run, grand slam win of a trade deadline for the Lakers. I'm just curious how it looks on the court, obviously, like we all are. On the flip side of that, I'll kick us off here. I've heard some mixed reviews on this team. The Charlotte Hornets, I think they're absolute winners. I agree. They consolidated and got so many future picks. I understand none of them are like the caliber of some of the first round picks that the Houston Rockets or the Thunder or the Pelicans have.
Who cares? They suck. Like,
exactly.
Sell off stuff.
And they got another promising young player in Dalton Connect. They got additional young pieces. People are saying like, LaMelo Ball has no more teammates. That's great. Guess what? They have their own pick this season. They can get another top pick, one of these great players, and Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg or I'm going blank on the other Rutgers player, Dylan Harper. Like, they're in great position. I love what they did at the deadline.
Agreed.
Cleveland Cavaliers.
I think you probably have to go winner for the Cavs. Picking up Hunter was a good move for them. Sold on Karis LeVert, which I don't think is a huge deal. Georges Niang. To me, that was definitely we're going for it this year, and we need a big wing to defend the Celtics.
Agreed. As well as the Thunder. I saw some people mention that as some national media people mention that as well.
Why am I forgetting Hunter's first name?
DeAndre
Hunter. I wanted to say DeAnthony Hunter for some reason. Look, if you got Hunter for a possible final series against the Thunder because you need him on Shea, like, Godspeed.
Agreed.
That's a 40 ball a night.
They also got under the tax, which is pretty big for them. But they did give up a couple additional swaps and a first-round pick in order to get him. Let's go ahead and go with the flip side of that. The Hawks. They're tanking.
But they don't own their own pick.
But they don't own their own pick.
Yeah. Bad choice there, I think.
I don't really understand.
I don't mind what they did, but I wish they had their own pick.
Agreed. Unless they're just planning on trading Trae Young, which could be very, very likely this offseason. I think that's another theme is the Kevin Durant's the Trae Youngs, the players who didn't get traded were all in all these rumors. It's going to be a big offseason.
I think the Hawks probably were hoping that the Spurs would go with a Trae Young trade. Correct. And the Hawks get their picks back.
And they were kind of stuck afterwards, which leads me to another one. Jacob, I think we have to go winners for the San Antonio Spurs. I understand the Fox fit with Wemby, like long-term. Maybe that's not the player you want to go all in for and bring in alongside Wemby, but they didn't go all in for him. You didn't give up much for him at all. And the Hawks just got way worse and you have their pick. I think they're in prime position. They didn't give up any of their young players. And we saw Fox look pretty damn good in his first game there alongside Wemby.
Yep. I would say the Spurs are winners.
Let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks.
Losers.
Yeah. Like
losers.
What on earth? Trade for Kyle Kuzma. You give up quite a bit for Kuzma, in my opinion. You trade off.
You're definitely hoping you get Lakers champion Kyle Kuzma,
and
which
even
is a big
then, you still don't have depth. And then you end up trading for Kevin Porter Jr., just hoping that he's going to be able to give you some ball handling, scoring off the bench.
That sucks.
It's gross.
It's also got Jericho Sims, but yeah, I would go Bucks losers.
I've got two more.
Another big loser team, the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yes, that's a good one. I didn't have them. I'm glad you mentioned them. All the talk about Jimmy Butler trying to trade and improve their team.
There was word that they were trying to get in on Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
Didn't work. End up having to pay to get off of Marcus Smart. And then didn't want to pay Jake LaRavia, so they sell him for pennies on the dollar. And
they basically just got themselves in a position to be able to extend Triple J this offseason using cap space.
Yep.
And didn't improve their team this season as they currently sit number 2 in the West. Just really quickly, and you can give your thoughts if you want this before we go through the last two teams on my list. But Denver Nuggets didn't do anything. Houston Rockets didn't do anything.
Yeah. I had heard that Houston kind of just wanted to stay put and give the young guys a chance, which makes sense.
I agree. But Houston fans are very mad online right now as they just lost their 5th straight game and are now currently in 4th place in the West after being in 2nd less than a week ago, or right around a week ago.
That's what happens when you lose 5 games.
And you're investing in your young players, which I think is the right choice. But I think they were worth discussing. Denver didn't get any better. They weren't able to get a Bruce Brown or anybody like that. But the last 2 teams I want to really discuss here, Jacob, first one being the Phoenix Suns. We saw them last night in person. The vibes are not good.
They're
awful. They didn't improve their team. They missed out on Jimmy Butler, and they made all these Kevin Durant trades and trade rumors public. Kevin Durant's pissed off. Apparently, all the players in the locker room are pissed off. Just an absolute disaster.
They suck. Give them to me first round.
Yep.
That might be a sweep.
Yep. Agreed. And then one more team, which is really interesting. The Dallas Mavericks, obviously a part of that Luka trade. They get AD back in the short term. They're still a really solid team, but all the talk was they were going to try and do something, to get another ball handler in after losing Luka. They do no other subsequent trades. They're very shorthanded in that regard. And
they did trade away Quentin Grimes for
one of the Martin brothers. Yeah, Caleb, who is still hurt, and they had to get an additional 2nd-round pick to make up for it, apparently.
Yeah.
And they're banking on getting Kevin Durant in the offseason, basically.
The Mavericks are less scary to me now in the playoffs than they were a week ago. Anthony Davis is very good. The front court defense of AD and Gafford, Lively, and PJ Tucker, that's a lot of size and good front court defense. I don't think they're going to score very much. I mean, you are now relying on Kyrie Irving to be the playmaker. Like, he's just not going to get those bigs into the position that Luka could. He's not going to be able to hit those swing passes across. They're losing a lot of production from other guys because how Luka made other guys look. And then now you can't stagger like your playmakers. So you're really relying on Jaden Hardy and Spencer Dinwiddie, and that's probably not what you want to do in the NBA playoffs.
Not at all. When the game slows down, I was talking about this with a coworker. Like, yes, you can feed AD in the paint all you want. You can play him alongside Gafford. You can play
And
them
they
alongside
kind of
Lively.
played. They kind of played in the Thunder's hand too,
Right.
with the double big lineup.
Exactly. And the Thunder can counter that and go small and run them out of the gym. Like I don't quite see it. And I think it's very short-sighted. Like I said, they're going to bank on trying to get a KD or somebody like that in the offseason. But I'm with you. They don't scare me. One other team, I lied. There's one more because I think we need to touch on the Jimmy Butler trade. Talk to me, winner or loser, the Golden State Warriors.
I don't know if they're a winner or a loser. They're probably a loser because you're paying Jimmy $60 million a year for the next 2 years. It's either going to work out really good, or Jimmy and Draymond are going to stab each other with a knife simultaneously in a week. They lost a lot of depth. That was one of my biggest takeaways. They lost a lot of depth. They're going to be a team that probably needs to play small. I kind of thought they might be a Vucevic team, but the Bulls just have no clue what they're doing.
That's another team. The Bulls might be the biggest loser of the trade deadline.
The Bulls are just they don't know what they're doing. They don't have a plan.
They're riding the coattails of Michael Jordan. Still,
they just don't have a plan. But yeah, Golden State probably becomes a tougher team. But like, what's their bench now? Like Pods and Moses Moody and Trace Jackson Davis?
I'll pull it up really quick because they played today. Obviously, Jimmy wasn't in the lineup, but they had Moses Moody, Trace Jackson Davis, Kevon Looney, Gary Payton, and Pat Spencer.
Yep, I'm not real worried about that.
And Quentin Post, two-way player that will be converted here soon if he's not already started for them at center.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. I agree completely. I think I'm with you.
They were
Jimmy,
very, very desperate. They were very desperate.
Having Jimmy in the playoffs, like that makes it, they'll win some games because of that. But in a 7-game series, I agree completely. The depth just isn't there. Gosh, I can't believe I didn't mention the Bulls. It's a good thing they're in Chicago because otherwise they'd be shipped to like Mexico City or Las Vegas or Seattle.
Yeah.
Just awful.
Not good.
We'll see what they do this offseason. Any other trades from today or from the trade deadline that we missed before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I think we've covered this pretty thoroughly. I
think the biggest takeaway here is the Thunder didn't really have to do much. They got one of their very best players, an emerging star, back from injury without having to give up anything, and they're in great position to do some really special things heading into the playoffs.
Agreed. Tomorrow's gonna be a fun game.
Agreed. And a back-to-back. Speaking of which, us here at the Uncontested will have you covered for both of those games tomorrow night against the Toronto Raptors, Chet's return back home at Paycom, and then Saturday night, the Thunder head to Memphis to play the Grizzlies on a Sega Baba. We will, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, have a live watch party. I know that's a little confusing. Had some people in our YouTube comments asking where's it going to be? It's going to be in our Discord. In our Discord channel, we'll have a streaming. We'll be doing live chats. It's a ton of fun. Be sure to go and subscribe to the Patreon. You'll get access to that in our Discord. But we are also still working on doing an in-person watch party again here before too long. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you all again for tuning in for our little bonus podcast here after the deadline. Thank you to Jacob for joining me. Thank you for all of you in the chat. So many great questions and comments that we just aren't able to get to tonight. We'll get to them again here soon. And until tomorrow night, after the game against the Raptors, Thunder up.